Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we're excited to welcome Angela VandenBroek. Angela is a sociocultural anthropologist whose research focuses on technologies, innovation, and business. She is currently an assistant professor at Texas State University. With a PhD in anthropology from Binghamton University, Angela brings over 13 years of experience as an applied anthropologist in fields such as information technology, design marketing, and organizational strategy. Her work sits at the intersection of business and design anthropology, as well as science and technology studies, exploring the dynamic connections between these areas. How are you doing today, Angela?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So, what is an assisted professor and how is it different from all the other titles that professors have?
So an assistant professor is basically the entry-level position for what is called a tenure track career in academia, right? So that's me. I'm at the bottom floor. I went right from my PhD into this position. So an assistant professor essentially has 5 years to demonstrate to their colleagues that they are good enough at their job that they should get to keep it. So every year I get a new contract and the university is like, yep, you can still stay. And then at the end of those 5 years, I have to put together this enormous package of all the research I've done, all of the teaching and mentoring I've done, and all of the service work I've done. And then it gets reviewed by my department and then our dean and external reviewers. And they all get to say, yep, you should keep your job and get promoted. And that's basically tenure. Tenure is essentially just a long-term contract. So instead of having a 1-year contract have to renew every year, it's a contract with no date. And so in order to get fired after that, you have to have cause usually. So instead of just deciding like, well, we didn't like you this year, so we're just going to not renew your contract. They have to actually say like, hey, you're terrible at your job, or you've done some misconduct, or you don't show up to your own classes, or, something like that. But what they can't do typically is fire you for the kind of research you do, which is why tenure exists in the first place. You don't want faculty to be fired because some politician decided they don't like the research that person does, right? So, and that's called academic freedom, is what we usually call it in the biz. But yeah, that's basically the tenure track. There's one more promotion after that called full professor, which just is, like any other organization. You do a good job, you get promoted again, you get a little bit more money.
And how much of your assistant professor, like the 5 years that you do, how much is it teaching? How much is it research? How much is mentoring, that kind of stuff?
Well, it's supposed to be in thirds. So you spend a certain amount, like a third of your time teaching and supervising graduate students and mentoring undergrads. And then you spend a third doing research and a third doing service work. And service is both internal and external. So like internally, that's like serving on committees and things like that. Because of the background I have, a lot of my service is actually designing things for the department. So our marketing materials, creating a new brand for the department, that kind of thing. And then externally doing service work for like professional organizations. Like I work for the Committee for the Anthropology of Science, Technology, and Computing, which is a whole mouthful, but we tend to call ourselves CASTAC, which is an organization in the American Anthropological Association. And I've been on the board of that for, more than a decade. So that is my external service work. So I say all that it should be in thirds. In reality, it's a lot more than thirds because I think I do probably 150 to 175% of what a normal job is right now. Some of that is putting on myself because I really want to do everything really well. And it's hard when you have so many responsibilities. And some of it's just academia. It's always a little extra work. And, when you care about your students and you want to help them through and, meet with them every time they want to meet, that cuts into your time for research, but your research obligations don't go away. You still have to do them. So it's a bit of balancing. And so it depends on the time of year, how much you're actually doing of any of those 3 buckets.
Do you get to pick the type of classes that you're teaching or create classes that you want to teach?
Yeah, so it depends on the program you're in. At Texas State, I've had a lot of leeway to create classes and things like that because we're in at least the cultural and linguistics part of the program. We're in a like big shift because we had a lot of retirements and a lot of new people. And so we're really working through like what kind of courses we want to offer and how our programs will run. So I've been able to create courses that I absolutely love that are just right in my core research area. I just finished teaching an undergraduate course called Social Impact and Innovation, where I teach students across anthropology and business and journalism and other programs, and particularly our minor innovation and entrepreneurship, about how business works in contemporary societies and entrepreneurship and things like that, and how a lot of the things we think about it aren't actually true and are actually really damaging when we want to have good social positive impacts in society. And so we talk about how you can use anthropology to build better strategies for business and entrepreneurship to do the things people actually want to do. So that's great. But also, we still have core courses that are required and have to be taught. So we all kind of pick the different areas that we're best at. So for me, I teach a lot of methods. Like I teach qualitative research methods for undergrads and PhD students, and I teach ethics for PhD students, that kind of thing.
So you would say that anthropology does contribute a lot to trying to understand business practices and consumer behavior.
Oh, for sure. So, I mean, part of it's like that. There's like a really easy answer to it. If businesses and the communities they're trying to sell to are all consisting of people, so who is better to help them with that than experts on people? So anthropology is good for that. But more than that, there's a lot of different disciplines that study and have expertise on people. But I think anthropology brings a really interesting and somewhat unique take that can be very helpful in different kinds of organizations, not just business, but also in policy spaces and in nonprofits and things like that. And so, like, for example, we tend to be much more inductive than other fields. So rather than kind of starting with like the scientific method of let's create a hypothesis and then test whether that hypothesis is true or not, instead we start with a broader research question and then gather a whole bunch of data and then surface from that what answers there could be for our question, which can be really powerful when you are starting from a place of not knowing where the data's at. So like if you're in a business and you have a customer base and you don't know them that well, it'd be really hard to come up with an appropriate hypothesis to test, right? Because it's going to be based on your particular position and your biases and your view of the world, where an anthropologist doesn't start there, right? We start with this idea that like humans are complicated and we need to go talk to the actual humans. So instead, we take that inductive approach. We go with our big question of like, what motivates people to buy this thing, right? And we go talk to them and say, what do you do? What does this mean? How does this work? How do you live your lives? And then we can come back and say, all right, so based on what's actually out there, we can tell you what are the patterns, what are the trends that businesses can tap into to make better connections.
A lot of people don't really think of it that way, when they're coming up with either surveys or they're doing research work. It's almost like, I don't want to say backwards thinking, but you are starting from the end and working your way back towards the front. And I feel like you might get better results that way because it'd be less unbiased rather than going out and asking this particular question and trying to get an answer to it. You're getting all these answers and be like, okay, what question can I form from this?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a really powerful way of doing research. And not to say that deductive research is bad, because sometimes deductive research is really good and it's certainly a lot faster to do. So if you are in a space, for example, where say you've already done the work, you know the people, you know what's going on, and you just really need to know this one factor, that's when a deductive approach is really helpful, right? Because then you know what your hypothesis should be and you just want to make sure it's right. But if you're starting in that open space where you're just like, I don't know, trying to understand these people, then it's better to take that broader perspective. I teach a lot of this in my qualitative methods course. We spend a lot of time like deprogramming because like you said, most people start with that way of thinking of hypothesis testing, partly because particularly in the United States, we drill the scientific methods into kids' heads from like elementary school all the way through. And we never really talk about other ways of knowing or thinking about the world. And so, but it's so powerful. I once worked with an organization where they had hired a consultant before I got there to help them rebrand their organization. And they had asked the consultant, what colors should we associate it with? And he put together a survey a huge number of responses from their community that they were serving and came back and said, well, they said their favorite colors are red, yellow, and blue. And so they were like, that not right. Okay. That's a weird combination. Why would we use that? But the problem was that he went and asked them what their favorite color was. It wasn't meaningful, right? So when I got there, I redid a lot of the work that the consultant did. Instead, what I asked the community were things like, here's a range of colors. What do these mean to you? What do you associate with these colors? And then I talked about the organization. If we're trying to portray ourselves this way, do you see the organization that way? And then made better connections between visuals and meaning. So we were able to make connections of things like this color for this community means things like heritage and connection to their community and history, or this color is associated with a very popular sport, which is why those particular colors sort of came up in the first survey. And it creates a much better connection with the community when you approach it that way.
Yeah, no, definitely. And with the students that you have coming through your classes, do you ever have any of them come back or email you and be like, hey, I got this job that I'm applying these methods that you taught me, or, oh, I thought anthropology was so interesting that I either picked up a minor or another major or transferred over to this. Have you ever had something like that?
I would absolutely love to say that I have. I know students who have gone on to do some cool stuff. I've had a couple that have started businesses and things like that. But I've only been in this particular job for a little over 3 years. So 3 years and 1 semester. So a lot of my students are still in school or have just started graduate school. So they haven't gotten off into their careers yet far enough for that. They inspire me so much. I just finished this social impact and innovation class, and the big class project they work on all semester is using inductive anthropological methods to pitch ideas to solve particular problems. And so they pitched ideas for businesses and nonprofits, policy change, and that kind of thing. And it was amazing. Every single one of them just out of this world, amazing ideas. And I was like, I hope you all go out into the world, build these things, do this work. Of like, anthropology doesn't have to just be a low-level employee doing UX research or be a professor. You can go start businesses. You can start a consultancy. You can start a nonprofit, start a social movement. You can do it. You have all the knowledge and tools. It's amazing. I'm so excited for them. So I hope in the future to hear from them, come back and be like, hey, remember that project I pitched? I did it.
I had a few classes like that where they wanted you to either come up with a product, or I had one class that was you had to come up with a business or something along those lines. And at the time, I'm like, gosh, this is so time consuming, and I'm not a creative person at all. So just having to think of something from scratch, I'm like, my brain doesn't work this way. And it was probably one of the hardest classes I took, but it kind of shows you what this would look like if you ever decide to be like an entrepreneur in the future. Like, what does it take to run a business or come up with the ideas and the promotional stuff and who you're going to hire? There's a lot that goes into it that a lot of people don't think of when they first start a business. So having classes like that are super beneficial. But getting into what you did before you were a professor, did you go from undergrad to grad school to being a professor? Or did you have some time in between for different kind of jobs?
Yeah, I did not have a very straightforward career. I just finished a chapter that's coming out in a book very soon. It is written it's an edited volume on design anthropology, edited by Janessa Spears and Christine Miller. And the whole thing is about my career and how I fell kind of backwards accidentally into it, because I was a poor kid who wanted to be an archaeologist. And that meant going to college and having a job to pay for part of it. A lot of it was in student loans. And then along the way between my degrees, I had a lot of other jobs paying for that career. And so I've ended up tacking back and forth a lot. So I've worked in retail and food service. I've taught private violin and viola lessons. I have worked in information technologies. I worked as a graphic designer, a branding consultant. I've done organizational strategy. I've even actually done evaluations for education. So when I was in New York, I worked on a project that was evaluating all of the virtual AP programs in the public education system in New York. And that was a lot of fun too. So I've been kind of all over. And it sounds very haphazard and crazy. And it kind of, at the time, it felt that way. But looking back on it, each different stage, I was developing new ways of using anthropology in that career, all the way back to retail. Like the very first time I thought about using anthropology was in a job interview, actually, at a department store where I really needed the job. And the manager just asked me, like, kind of a perfunctory, you have this on your resume that you're an anthropology major. Like, what are you going to use that for? Can that be helpful here? And I was like, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. And we were standing in the middle of this department. It was called the special department because it included petites, plus, and special occasion dresses. And the whole department had been just packed with stock because the manager who was interviewing me thought that the more stuff you put on the floor, the more likely it would sell, because then people wouldn't have to ask for more sizes or anything like that. Well, he did this in some really problematic ways. And so I walked him through the departments and said, okay, let's treat this like participant observation, which at the time I had like literally just learned in class. So I was like, what does it feel like to do shopping in these rooms? So I walked over to the petites department, and I am 5'3", which is just the cutoff for petites. And he had these double stacked racks. They're called six ways, where like the arms point out forward and backward. And so shirts were hanging above pants. And I was like, I can just barely reach the shoulders of the hangers on these racks. And I'm the tallest a petite person's going to be in this apartment. So right away, you've made me feel like I don't belong here. Like this isn't for me. And now I have to go ask for help. And so then we walked over to the plus department, and to fill space there, they had just put more racks on the floor, which meant to walk into the department, you had to, at the time, I was quite young undergrad and like a size 12, you'd have to turn sideways and shimmy between the racks to get in. And as I was shimmying between the racks, I knocked a bunch of stuff on the floor. And I was like, oh, this is a terrible thing. Like, can you imagine being a woman who is heavier, wears a larger size, and trying to be in this space? All she wants is to have an experience where she's buying new clothes that make her feel good, make her feel confident. That's what's going to make her want to buy, right? But making her feel like this space isn't for her, that she doesn't fit here, that's just going to make her have a negative experience about herself and about these clothes. So it's not a great way to do it. And anyway, this whole thing was the first time I started thinking about, anthropology is actually really useful for thinking about things, because it wasn't just the practicalities of like, yes, a short person can't reach a tall rack. It's the connections you make about what that means for people in that moment, what it feels like to be a human being in our culture and society, and how that impacts people's decisions, like what they buy or how much time they spend in a store. And so I've just kind of built that in every single step of my career and tried to do that more. Where can I add more? What can I read? What can I learn that I can apply to the things I'm doing? And it made my whole career, despite being kind of haphazard and all over, really rewarding. And it's actually been really beneficial to me now, because I'm in a program that has a very applied focus. And our PhD program is actually explicitly an applied anthropology program. So I have a lot of these skills to help students figure out, how to navigate these careers, how to take our skills and our degree and move them into organizations, policy, and things like that.
That's something I didn't even think about, like with retail. For one, I hate shopping. Like I would just rather not do it. But to go into a retail store and be able to think like, how would this, because most companies don't do that. They don't think, how would this make this customer feel? It's just, what can we push into their face that'd be like, hey, buy this, but not how, like, how does it make you feel trying to even get to our products? Because if I was in a store like that, I'm an introvert. I'm not going to ask anybody for help. I will just leave. I'm like, I don't need it that bad. And I think that's something that a lot of businesses don't take into effect, which is also why I feel like anthropology is super important in having individuals or educating the public to recognize why we're important to any public kind of facilities, engagement part, that kind of stuff. Because going to school for an anthropology degree, you always get the feedback of, you're not going to find a job with that unless you're a professor. You're not going to be able to make money in this. You're going to be like a musician or an artist. You're not going to do well. But they just don't understand how many things we can apply it to, which is the whole point of this podcast, is to talk to all these different people in all these different fields so that people understand that we are, even though we are a humanities science, we're still kind of a science. But anyways, one of the questions that I had for you, and I kind of ask it to everybody, but I feel like for you, I believe it is super important, is why did you get into anthropology? You mentioned you wanted to go into archaeology. Like, what kind of piqued your interest in this field?
Well, it's kind of terrible and embarrassing, but I'll tell you anyway. I was very young. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and around the formative years of when I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be. What was really popular at the time were things like the X-Files, and I was very into aliens and conspiracy theories, and I firmly was in the camp of aliens built the pyramids and et cetera, ancient aliens, all of that. So I was like, I'm going to be an archaeologist, going to be amazing. I'm going to be an Egyptologist because I was so in love with that idea. Then I went to college and I got into the anthropology program. I declared my major on the first week of classes and I started taking classes and learned very quickly that everything I thought was completely wrong. So I still loved archaeology, but I learned really quickly things like, hey, it's a little bit problematic and racist to think that people in the past and people of color from the past aren't capable of building their own marvelous things like pyramids and sphinxes, etc., and that they would need the help of some kind of extraterrestrial being to do that. So I debunked that very quickly early in my career. And then I took a lot of archaeology classes and really enjoyed the idea of archaeology, and doing field work was a lot of fun. I even went to graduate school starting out trying to do archaeology. I spent half a semester in archaeology working with my advisor, who is absolutely amazing woman. Her name was Marie Danforth at Southern Mississippi. And we were talking to each other. It was like, what are you going to do your thesis on? I was like, what about this? And she's like, that's not an archaeology project. That's a cultural question. How are you going to answer that? Archaeology? And I just couldn't settle on anything that was archaeology. And I just learned quickly that a lot of the questions I had about the world that I really wanted to spend time on were cultural questions. And so I switched over and I moved over to work with a guy named Jeffrey Kaufman, who's an ethnographer who specializes in Madagascar and now works in public policy. And he was like, all right, let's sit down. And what is it you care about that you want to study for the next few years? And I developed a master's thesis project talking with Muslim women living in the deep south of the US and what kind of experiences they were having, because this was shortly after 9/11 and at kind of the height of the Iraq War. And so there was a lot going on for that community, which continues to this day, unfortunately. And so I spent that time working with them. I thought I was going to go give voice to these women and tell their stories. And really what I learned is that they didn't need me at all to tell any of their stories. They were perfectly capable of doing it themselves. And instead, they just taught me a whole lot about what it means to be an anthropologist, to work with a community, what I can offer them and what they offer me, and how we can build strong collaborative relationships across that. And so they taught me a lot about anthropology, and I taught them a lot about anthropology, and it was an amazing experience. So yeah, that's how I got into cultural anthropology.
Awesome. Because I also have a degree in cultural anthropology, because while I found all four fields fascinating, I am horrible at science. So I couldn't go the biological anthropology route. Because also, when you go the biological anthropology route, you tend to be in school a lot longer, because most of the time you're going in for some kind of research base. As far as linguistics, I took one English grammar class and I said, never again. It was so hard. I'm like, I'm fluent enough in English that this is fine. I'm good without having to dive deeper into why we say what we say, or body movements or whatnot, body signals. And then going into archaeology, I'm like, while it would be really cool to, go to all these different sites or whatnot, a lot of people don't spend a lot of time at these great archaeological finds, like going to the pyramids or going to Stonehenge. It's usually you're in some kind of part in your state and you're like, oh, we're digging through some dirt in somebody's backyard. And you're just, it's stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't really enjoy living off the grid. I like my modern necessities, like my computers and my indoor plumbing and having hot showers. So going through the cultural anthropology route, I'm like, I get to learn about all these different cultures and their traditions and the food and why they are the way they are, and watching all these documentaries on Netflix or Disney Plus and being like, that's super cool. I can now tell people about all these different little facts that I learned. So I feel like individuals who go into cultural anthropology is more to learn about people and why people are the way that they are. For anybody who is interested in getting into cultural anthropology is great.
Yeah. Cultural anthropology is definitely, it's very broad and wide ranging. I think it's sometimes difficult for people to wrap their mind around when they become like anthropology majors because, biological anthropology is pretty straightforward. Like there are these specific areas that most people want to do. Here at Texas State, we have a phenomenal forensics programs that a lot of our students absolutely love.
Is that the one
Yeah.
with the body farm?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's really cool stuff. And I got really into forensics for a hot minute too at one point in my career. But, it's cultural anthropology is just this kind of, I don't know, wibbly wobbly, complicated thing to describe because it's just we create theory about people. And a lot of what makes us anthropologists is just our approach to how we understand people. But this said, I think I really enjoy as an American, having worked overseas as well, that I've had the opportunity to have that four field holistic education in anthropology because I have studied in all four subdisciplines across all three of my degrees. And I use them. I still think about when working in design, I think about bodies. How do bodies work? How have we evolved to work with the things that we touch and live with? When it comes to archaeology, the materiality of stuff is so important. And particularly when you work in like innovation and technology spaces, is we tend to think about technologies as like the ephemeral cloud of the internet, right? Instead of like the real material things like server farms and the effects those have on the communities where they are and the environments where they are. And so archaeology really provides a lot of theory and ways to think about materiality of our lives and the stuff we live in, which is really cool. And of course, language is fundamental to really understanding our culture and society. I'm also not great at learning languages, but I very much enjoy linguistic theory as a way to approach thinking about particularly things like meaning and how we share things through our language and our discourse. And it's just a really powerful and useful way of making sense of the world.
Yeah. And with linguistics, it's not a well-known part of the anthropology discipline. When you think of anthropology, you think of all the other ones, but linguistics is kind of sitting in the background. And so when you tell people like, oh, I'm a linguistic anthropologist, they're like, what does that mean? And for a long time, I was thinking, oh, you're the people who like study hieroglyphics or the Rosetta Stone and you translate and that, which plays a part. But one of the guests that I had on, Jenna Barkis Lichtenstein, they are a linguistic anthropologist, and they said that one of the papers they had done was about how you greet individuals. You can say like, hey, what's up? Or, hit them on the shoulder and be like, what's up, buddy? And like, this could be the first time meeting them. And it plays a lot into how you might view a person. And also things when I was editing episodes, they're like, don't take all the filler words out because filler words are important, like likes. And I say that word so many times, I can recognize the wavelength in the audio whenever I say those. So with them mentioning that kind of stuff, that's things that you don't think about when you think of linguistic anthropology, which is why I feel like more people need to go that way a little bit more to make the discipline a little bit more well known.
And that speaking of businesses and organizations, linguistic anthropology is incredibly useful, especially right now with the growth in like large language models, for example, and how we're putting those to use and understanding them. Linguistics is like crucial to that. And linguistics is its own separate field from as like anthropology is, but I feel like cultural and linguistic are like the twins, right? So the other two are siblings, but linguistics and cultural are twins. We sit together, we overlap in a lot of really interesting ways. And I think, we make each other a lot stronger because I can't study culture and society without language. It is such an integral part to it, even though it's not my speciality. It's definitely an area of anthropology that I think most cultural anthropologists draw on.
Yeah, no, definitely. Now, you had brought it up a little bit of you have contributed to a portion of a book that is coming out. Did you want to go in a little bit more detail on exactly what that is?
Oh, sure. So it's called The Rutledge Companion to Practicing Anthropology and Design. And it's edited by Janessa Spears and Christina Miller. It's compendium of a bunch of different people writing about design anthropology from a bunch of different perspectives. So a lot of practical stuff, right? How to have a career in design, which is the section I'm in, people talking about particular methodologies and different theories. So it's available for pre-order now. So, I mean, it is textbook expensive. So I highly recommend requesting your local librarian to buy it and share it with your community. But yeah, that is a project that's just come out recently. I have a couple other book projects going on. I'm currently editing 2 volumes. One with a colleague of mine, Nicole Taylor, on methods. So it's called Kits for Digital Methods. And we are putting together really practical chapters about how to do really innovative methods in socio-technical research. Because a lot of digital anthropology and science and technology studies methods get mentioned in books and articles. They're just like, by the way, I did this really cool, innovative thing. And then that's it. They don't tell you how to do it, what you need. And so a lot of it's like who you know and who you get trained by. So we wanted to make some more transparency in that space. So we have asked people to put together what we're calling kits. And so the first part of the chapter, we'll just talk about, what kind of research they did and why they needed to make a method for it. And then a list of everything you need to do that method. And then a step-by-step instruction for how to do it. I'm really excited for that one to come out. We're currently editing it, so it should hopefully go into press next fall. And then the other one is anthropology or AI and anthropology, which I'm editing with Matt Arts, who's also a podcaster in anthropology, and Laura Krejceva. And the 3 of us are putting together a collection of anthropological voices on AI because it's this, new hot topic for the world. But anthropology has actually been talking about AI for a long time. Like people like Diana Forsyth back, in the 80s and 90s, writing about artificial intelligence and all these companies that were trying to create it. So we are kind of gathering together different perspectives from anthropology. It's going to be kind of like a diverse, kind of emerging conversation kind of book, and should be a lot of fun when it comes out as well.
Cool. Yeah, and I'd love to get the links for those from you, and I can put them on your episode so other people can check them out once they do come out. Do these projects ever count as like research for you guys with your university?
Oh, definitely for me. So for tenure, different departments do it differently. I am very lucky to be in a department that has made the tenure process quite transparent. I have peers who have been at universities where they go to their other faculty members and they're like, what do I need to do to get tenure? And they're just like, well, be good at research, be productive. Why don't you look at other people's tenure packages and see if that's works, if you can do that? And that is mind-blowingly difficult and so stressful. My department instead is very kindly put together a list of things that count for the research part of tenure, assigned each one a point value, and then told me I need to get 10 points. So for me, that looks like 1 point is like a peer-reviewed article or a peer-reviewed book chapter, 1 point for editing a book. So yeah, that's kind of how my tenure track is going to work. So these 2 volumes, for example, that I'm editing, I'll get a point for editing and then a point for each of the chapters I've written in it. So 1 body chapter and the introduction, probably, as long as we get those peer reviewed.
That's really cool. I think transparency is something that a lot of universities or even businesses have a hard time with, because when you're transparent about things, you might not get the people in the programs or the job position that you want. So making it a little bit more difficult so that you get a broader array of individuals who are attempting this. I think a lot of businesses need to stop doing that.
I mean, and it's also an equity issue. Like I am first gen everything. I'm the first in my family to graduate college, to graduate a master's degree, graduate a PhD, and to get a faculty position. So,
Congrats.
Which yay. But also it meant that at every stage of my career, I had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't know things like what office hours were for. And then when I finished my PhD, I didn't know how to apply for faculty jobs. And now that I'm here, I'm like, I didn't understand what tenure was. And so when you have more transparency and more thought put into that process in a way that makes it easier for people who aren't multi-generational academics or who don't come from the right class or the right race or the right background, right? That it makes more space for those people to make their way through those systems. And so, I think it's important to create more of that space. And mentorship too is so vital for having a good career, especially in anthropology, which is such a hard space because you don't go to LinkedIn and type in anthropologist and see a bunch of job titles that say anthropologist, right? Like we work in everything from like analyst to researcher to, God knows there's some weird titles out there these days. As David Graeber would call them bullshit jobs, but you know, yeah, without mentorship to help you navigate those things, it can be really difficult. And, I've benefited from having really good mentors in anthropology, both in academics and outside of academics, who have helped me navigate that, find what are the keywords to search for what I want to do in the world, how to navigate different systems and things like that. So yeah, transparency and mentorship, so important.
Do you have after going through your experience with undergrad, grad school, PhD, do you have any recommendations for any students who are maybe looking to enter a grad or PhD program?
So one I would say, maybe controversially, go to graduate school. I know right now a lot of people are saying like, oh, don't go to graduate school. It's not financially worth it, etc., which I agree with, but I don't think it is necessarily the right lens to approach graduate school. So if you want to go to graduate school because you think it's going to train you for a very specific career, then don't go. It's not for you. That's not what it's for. But particularly, even if you just go for like a 2-year master's degree, it is so fundamentally different from undergrad because in undergrad, you spend almost all of your time just going to class, listening to lectures, reading a few books, taking tests, and then you finish, right? And so a lot of the skills you learn in undergrad are things like how to read text, how to listen to lectures and take notes. But what you don't get a lot of experiences like how to do research, how to manage a project, how to manage your time across multiple things, how to be self-directed, how to learn new knowledge yourself instead of having someone give it to you in a lecture, right? Or an assigned reading. Those are skills that you get in graduate school because at each time you move up in graduate school, you get less coursework, more independent research. So like as a master's student here at Texas State, our program, you have 2 years in the program, and the first year you take coursework and then you work on your thesis proposal. So you're developing a individual project you will work on. So you build a literature review based on your own interests. You have to figure out what methods are appropriate to use, what the ethics of doing your project will be. And then you have to justify all that to a committee of faculty members and get it approved. Then over the summer between your year 1 and year 2, you go collect data on that yourself. So you get to actually go do your interviews, do the participant observation, carry out the research you planned, which is such an amazing experience, especially because people tend to think that when you're doing research, particularly you're not an anthropologist, that, you make a plan, you set your methods, you go collect the data, and it goes exactly how you think it's going to go. We study people, and people are insane and unpredictable and never do what you think they're going to do. And so most of the time you go into field work and it's like curveball after curveball. The people you thought you were going to talk to don't want to talk to you. You think that what's going to happen doesn't happen. What you think is important, no one else thinks is important. And so it really teaches you how to be nimble and agile and respond quickly and to follow what's important, what's salient in the particular community and things like that. So after you collect all your data, you come back for year 2 and you take some more coursework, but you also analyze all your data and then have to synthesize that into a thesis where you tell the important stories, you explain why it's important and what you learned from it. And those are important skills if you want to be an applied anthropologist, right? So being able to go to an employer and say like, hey, you hired me to figure out this problem. This is what I did to solve it. And here's what I learned and why it's important and what you should do with it are crucial skills. So graduate school is a great time to learn those skills. But of course, if you're going into it saying like, well, I'm going to go be an anthropologist and I'm going to get a job called anthropologist afterwards, that's not a great option. So if you're going to go to graduate school, what I suggest is to know what you kind of want to do with your life, right? And that can always change. Look at me. I did so many different things and it changed constantly. But if you go into graduate school knowing like these are the kinds of skills I want to develop, I want to learn about this particular area. So like say you want to go work in industry, then learn about business and organization. Or say if you want to go into community organizing, learn about activism and advocacy and how that works. Focus your individual research there. If you go to graduate school not having any idea what you're interested in or what you want to do, graduate school is going to be a hard time. But if you go in with a good, solid idea of what it is you want to accomplish and what skills you want to build, it can really set you up for a stronger career. That's my advice.
And it's great advice. Getting into one of our questions regarding salary, I know it varies depending on what university you're working for, what level of a professor that you are, but someone who is just finishing their PhD or just got done with their postdoctoral research, what kind of salary range would they be looking at being an assistant professor?
So yeah, like you said, it really depends on a lot of factors. So it depends on like where you live, what kind of institution you're at. Because say like a professor working at assistant professor entry level in California is going to make a whole lot more than I do in Central Texas. If you, I don't know, are at a university in a small rural community in Ohio, you're going to make a lot less than I do in Central Texas, right? So I like to think about it more of like cost of living comparison. An assistant professor, like where I live in Central Texas, I make mid 70,000 range, which is enough for me to pay all my bills. I was able to buy a house, those kinds of things. But I'm not going to be rich on this career. It's not why I chose it. As you move up, most professors, as they get through each promotional stage, make a little bit more money and tend to be pretty secure financially, which is nice. If you want to make gobs of money, go into industry. Not every industry job is going to be lucrative, but they're more lucrative over there. But I tend to tell students when they're thinking about, where they want to work, whether that's in industry or nonprofit or higher education, that really what they should pay attention to is the broader experience of the job and the career. So I make less money now as an assistant professor than I did at the height of my career in design and IT. But I work weirdly less hours now than I did then because I was on call 24/7. If something happened, I had to get out of bed. I had to log into the server and fix what was going on. There was a lot more pressure to be on constantly. And it was a, more traditional 9 to 5 job where you had to be in an office for 8 hours a day in a cubicle, that kind of thing. Where now I have a lot of flexibility. I need to hold office hours for a set number of hours a week, and I need to be in my classroom a certain number of hours a week. And then the rest of my time, I decide when I work. So some weeks I'm like totally burnt out, and I'm like, nope, I'm just going to go to class. I'm going to prep my classes, and I'm going to hold my office hours. I'm done. And then other weeks I'll be like, I'm feeling so inspired and motivated to do research this week. I'm going to work 15-hour days every day and write. And so that flexibility and that ability to work when I want to work is so valuable to me. Like, especially in the more creative parts of anthropology of like writing and research and things like that, being able to follow what inspires me is a huge benefit to working in this kind of job that I wouldn't be able to do elsewhere. So it's really about, kind of figuring out what kind of life you want to lead, what flexibilities do you want, what benefits, what securities do you want, and making choices that way. Because salary is just a small component of all that.
Yeah, like I'm a person who is very motivated by money, and working a job, if a job is gonna have me make less money than where if I was working somewhere else, I better have like either really good benefits or time off or, it brings joy. Cause like the current job that I'm working as an administrative assistant, love my boss. She is the best boss I've ever had by a landslide. While it's only part-time because that's all she offers, I'm okay with that because I enjoy the work that I do for her, and whenever I finish my work early, she doesn't mind if I do things like edit podcast episodes or working on my website descriptions for the episodes because she knows that I'm going to get my work done. Whereas other jobs that I've worked at that made either the same amount of money, but I had to work more hours, I was just burnt out all the time because I'm just like, wow, every day I wake up, I'm like, I hate my job. If I could just not go to work, and I'll tell my husband, I'm like, I need you to make more money so that I don't have to work. when I was working those kind of jobs. But like working for her, I'm just like, oh, I don't mind going into work. I can still bring things that I need to do on the side, and I'll finish my work for her, and then I'll work on my stuff for me. And not having as many hours kind of makes that worth it, because I'm in a space, I can't move from this space, so I have to get my stuff done. Whereas if I'm at home, I'm like, I ain't doing anything. So it's a good motivator.
But thinking about like organizational anthropology, right, and working with businesses and stuff, I think we tend to think because, particularly like economics tells us that like people are these rational economic actors. They go out and they make decisions to maximize their individual profits and things like that. And so when we think about like salary and benefits negotiation, it's just that like, how can I get the most dollar signs, right? But I don't think people actually think that way. I think a lot of salary negotiation really comes down to how one feels valued in a position, right? And so if you're feeling like, I'm not paid enough to do this, I'm not paid enough to put up with this, it's not really a salary problem, it's a value problem. When your employer doesn't make you feel like you are a valued human being and that your skills are valuable and that they're being put to use. So things like micromanagement or people who like they constantly like their decisions get overridden or their judgment isn't trusted, they're the kind of people who are going to feel like they're not paid enough to be in that position, right? And this happens a lot, particularly like, the jobs that aren't the C-suite, the vice presidents, et cetera, the people who are, coding or are folding clothes at the department store. We tend to not see those people as creative, as people who are innovative, but they're actually the people who are the most connected with the services and products and the people and communities that business is a part of. And they're the space that is one of the best places to look for creativity and innovation, to talk to and listen to and trust. And when organizations do that, then people are more likely to want to stay there. They're going to feel valued, even if they're paid a little bit less. And I think that is why a lot of people find more fulfilling jobs in nonprofits, for example, that work that way, or more cooperatively owned businesses and things. We could do business and organizations so much better. And we could have much more productive conversations than just, like, here's your salary, you've got your 6 figures, so you better be happy now, right? There's a lot I could talk your ear off all night about business anthropology and different insights. But yeah, I think it's so important to just think about this is so much more than just people going, I want to be paid and I don't want to work. Because I don't think that's true. People like working. They like feeling like they're valuable and that they're doing something that's important and that is making life better for themselves, for their communities, for other people, even if it's small and mundane. I don't think people don't want to work. I think people just don't want to work in jobs where they're treated like automatons with no brains and no agency and no expertise. It's devaluing as a human. It's a really good ethnography by a guy named Edward Fisher. It's called The Good Life. And I really like it because he talks about how, we tend to think about having a good life as having those like base necessities of like food, clothing, housing, etc. But he's like, you can have all that and have a terrible life. What really gives people good lives is feeling like they are connected to a community, that they have something to aspire to, and that they can aspire to it with some kind of dignity. And he looks at how people make economic decisions along those lines, right? Not just about, the base of like, how do I survive, but how do I aspire to something better, a future that I want to be a part of, a community I want to be a part of. And it's such an important insight into how people actually think and behave and make decisions. We're social animals. Like we want to be with each other. We want to support each other. Like there's so very few things about humanity that is universal, There are very, very few. So much of what we do is social or cultural constructions that we could, invent over and over in new ways. But we are not a species that does well alone, right? We like to be connected to each other. And it's such an important thing to pay attention to how those connections are formed and how, systems of power and discrimination break down those connections and how that harms us and our cultures and our society and how it shapes what we learn and what we value and how we govern ourselves. It's important.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, before we get to our final four questions, is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you would like the listeners to know about?
I, I think we've talked about so many things. I think I'll let you ask your last four questions instead of probably insinuating new things to talk about.
Yeah, no worries. So, my first question, and we kind of touched on this one as well, is what is the best piece of advice you would offer to someone who is interested into either getting in the industry that you've worked in previously or getting into academia?
So I think the advice I would have is to not treat anthropology as a career. Anthropology isn't a career, it is a discipline, it is a way of thinking and moving through a career. And if you approach it that way, you can apply anthropology to anything. So you can, whether it's IT or marketing or education or professorship, you can apply it to just about anything. And so I think the biggest mistake a lot of people start with is this idea of I have to have this career in the thing I got a major in. And that works really well if you are, say, a business major. You go to school, you get a major in business, you become a business person, right? Or you go to school with a major in nursing, you become a nurse, or you, I don't know, go to Juilliard and study ballet and you become a ballerina, right? These are very clear trajectories. But that is not how anthropology and honestly a lot of the humanities work. Instead, it is a way of training you to see the world differently, a set of methods for how to engage with the world, a set of ethics for how to engage with the world. And you apply that to whatever it is you end up doing. And so I encourage my students to think more broadly about their careers, right? Not as what am I going to be as an anthropologist and going out and Googling, anthropology jobs, but instead thinking about, what is it that fascinates you about humans and our society? What do you care about? Is it technology? Is it business? Is it economics? Is it policy? Is it community organizing? Right? Whatever that is, figure that out and then study that anthropologically and then go into that as your career, right? That should be your career, not anthropology. Anthropology is just the tool set, the kit you need, right, to do that career in a way that is fulfilling and somewhat unique and not as common, which makes you very marketable if you're good at telling the story about yourself, about how those skills, those methods, that theory, all the empirical stories you've heard about humanity and learned and how you can apply that. That is so much more powerful than just saying like, I am a business person and now give me a business job, right? It's a very different way of thinking about a career. And I think it's important that our students do that even we think about it that way. Like my job as a professor is not that fundamentally different from my time in industry. Like I spent in both jobs an inordinate amount of time sending emails, negotiating weird little esoteric pieces of policy. I spent a lot of time training people on how to do specific tasks in both, teaching people about anthropology and why it's important in both. It's not about applied versus academic. I think that's a mistake to make. Instead, to think about what is it you want to do. If you want to spend all of your time doing research that you mostly control, then go into academics. But otherwise, just use anthropology wherever you happen to be, and you'll be able to build a career for yourself that way.
Are there any changes that you wish to see within academia?
Well, a lot. Do you have another hour? But honestly, it's not just academia. I'd like to see changes in academia and in industry and a lot of things, and just our society in general. I'd like to see us be much more empathetic and open to diverse needs of diverse people. Right? I want to have more, like thinking about just within my job, I want to see more people be anthropologists, not just those people who happen to hear about anthropology through some privilege in their background. I think it is such a useful set of skills, and we need to invite more people to that table at all levels. Unfortunately, here in Texas, our governor has made it impossible for us to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our policy as a university. We're allowed to talk about it in the classroom as part of education because of academic freedom, but we're no longer allowed to talk about it in things like hiring and picking graduate students and things like that. And I think that's a mistake. It's because diversity, equity, inclusion isn't about this like zero-sum game of making sure the right people are in the right places. It's about saying we have this space and we want to have people here, right? So right now we only have one type of person in it. And that's not good for them. That's not good for the discipline. We want to have as many people here as possible. We want to grow. And in order to do that, we have to make this space not just available, but welcoming to all different kinds of people and experiences. And we very fundamentally need that, both in academia and in industry, to just have more people and more people in the room with more perspectives, because you only have one type of person and one type of perspective in a room, you're never going to solve any problems because you can only solve your own, because you don't know anything about anyone else's. That's just one area. We could talk about all kinds of other stuff like, oh, the tenure system and how it works, and but having to get academic jobs and the problems with things like letters of recommendation and how all that works. But I think the most important point is just we need to really become a field that is more welcoming to other people and not just the people who have always been here. You do a lot of research in feminist science and technology studies, and there was a lot of theory back in the day in the 80s by wonderful people like Sandra Harding and Donna Haraway about the idea of objectivity, right? So this idea that you could have a human being look at a situation and go, that is exactly what's happening objectively. That is the same for everyone. But then questioning why the people who got to be objective, right, who got to say these are facts, were primarily one type of person, right? And upper class, Euro-American, white male, and straight and able-bodied and all those other things, right? And everyone else who came to that same situation and pointed and said, no, this is what it is, would be immediately put into a body and said, oh, you only see it that way because you're a woman. You only see it that way because you're queer. You only see it that way because you're disabled, etc. And so only a specific kind of person got to be objective. And so they said, rather than trying to play around with all these different ideas of, how do we make the perfect method that makes everything objective? Maybe we just need to accept subjectivity. And instead of just saying, we need one perfect perspective from nowhere, we instead just need to get many subjective positions that are well documented as to what leads to that perspective and overlap them all together. And when you combine them together, we get much closer to objectivity than if we just pretend we're objective because we don't want to pay attention to other perspectives.
And this kind of goes great into the next question. Is like, because what do you just absolutely love about your job and the field that you work in?
Well, so I love anthropology for all the things we've been talking about, so I won't reiterate that. But I spent a lot of time as a practicing anthropologist in a lot of different fields, and I actually loved a lot about a lot of them. I love doing design work. I still do a lot of that. But what I really like about being a professor is the time I get to spend with students and getting to share with them a lot of the experiences and mentorship that I got, because I very much became the anthropologist I am because I had incredible mentorship from people who took the time to help me navigate different things and figure things out. And so being able to do that for new generations of students and being able to have those conversations with them and then see them get to be inspired and excited and go out and build new anthropologies is something that is so amazing. And I never got to do an industry, right? So I was usually the only anthropologist in the room. And the best I could do is just convince other people that what I was saying was at least valuable, right? But now, I get to spend time with just absolutely brilliant, empathetic students. They just surprise me every single semester. I just love working with them.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can listeners learn more about you and what you do?
So probably the easiest way is to go to my website. It's AKVBrook if you want to say it very fast. It's just my initials with the Brook spelled out. But I'm also all over social media, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, all those places. You can also find me at Texas State University's website. You can check out our programs. And I also run the Innovative Anthropologies lab there, and our details are on the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me today. I love the conversations that we had.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I love having these casual conversations. So I hope it's helpful to you and to all of your listeners. And I'm always open to, having conversations. So if any of your listeners are thinking about graduate school and want to apply to Texas State, they can shoot me an email. We can have conversations. Be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show was produced by me. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, Leah Akers for the incredible logo design, and to Fiona, AnthroPuzzled's newest intern, for editing the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letsinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, or YouTube. Until next time.